Funding for the production of Folks is made possible in part by a grant from Union National Life Insurance, serving Louisiana and the South since 1926. A family-managed corporation providing whole life insurance.
Coming up today on Folks, Charles Hutchinson, a Louisiana wildlife artist, Adrienne Hoard, an abstract painter, La Belle Gallery, the only gallery of its kind in New Orleans, and a tribute to the lake sculptor Frank Hayden, all on today's edition of Folks. Hello everyone and welcome to Folks. I'm Sonya Masingale. We're continuing our look at the highlights of last season today with a look at the state of arts and artists in Louisiana. We have some fascinating profiles of two artists, one who is traditional, one contemporary, a unique gallery in New Orleans, and more. So let's get started. Charles Hutchinson has been carving and painting realistic renditions of wildfowl for well over 30 years. He has taught many others this art, including his brothers and son. You could say he is carving a legacy in wood. Charles Hutchinson grew up a child of both town and country. Living in Covington, Louisiana in the summers gave him a love of all creatures and respect for the balance of nature. His formal education in the city of New Orleans instilled a love for the arts and humanities. Hutchinson's first experience with carving wildfowl began by creating his own duck decoys for hunting. He was an adult before he realized that carving duck decoys was considered an art.
When the 30s and 40s come, even before, I would say about the 40s and 50s, they began to make the decoys in plastic. Now, all these men who carved, there was no way that they could keep up with these machines. It was popping them out, you know, and the prices they were getting from was real cheap, you know. And they were good to hunt over. They were light. They had everything that you needed to hunt. So what happened, the old men quit carving, and then the art form began to die. And some people realized that this was a dying art form, and they begin to collect the decoys. So they become very valuable, and people begin to collect them and all, and then this is where Charles W. Frank, he began to record these old men, you see, and he wrote 2 books about the Louisiana decoy carvers, and in his first book, he heard about me, and he came over and he spoke to me. And I became an intercessor for him, brought him to all the old black carvers and people, and he interviewed them. And we went to the Cajuns and all over, you know, everybody that carved decoys, we went there and recorded. And this is how I met Charles Frank. Now, Charles Frank is, he was a businessman here, and he introduced me to decorative carving. You know, this is where they did all the birds in detail and everything, in fine detail. Even though I was painting a lot of detail on my decoys, I hadn't used a burning tool or anything like that. So he gave me my first burning tool, and he introduced me to decorative carving. And then I was off to the races then when I got that, you know. And then we formed a guild, the Louisiana Wildfowl Carvers and Collectors Guild, which is still functioning. And there was a renaissance. People began, all these old men began, their decoys were sought after. And it was wonderful to see these old men starting to carve again, and you know, they had a purpose again. They weren't just sitting on the front porches waiting for time to go, you know.
Each of Hutchinson's intricate sculptures begins with a seasoned piece of Tupelo gum, a wood handpicked by himself and family members from Louisiana bayous. His attention to detail is meticulous. This Lady Amherst pheasant is a perfect example of his work. Each feather is painstakingly carved, painted, and fitted individually by hand. The techniques Hutchinson employs are uniquely his own, since he has had almost no formal art training.
I went to one of the leading universities here, and I I told him that I wanted to paint. But I always was interested in realistic art because that was an avocation with me. In my youth, I wanted to be able to paint like Audubon, you know, because I liked wildlife. So I went there to this place. It was a prestigious school, you know, and they told me that what I was trying to do could be done with a camera. And I told them, but I wasn't a camera. I wanted to paint realistically. But the people there weren't into realistic work, you know. So they kept with trying to bend me to their way. So what I did, I came home, and my kids were very small, and like 3 and 5. And I gave them a canvas to just smear up. And they got on the floor, and they went to work with the canvas, you know, and they were painting it. I had newspaper all on the floor. So my wife got tired of that, and she said, now that's enough. Let's clean up this mess. So she put them in the tub, because they had as much paint on them as they had on the canvas. You know, they're having a ball. And I signed the canvas, and I brought it to my next class, and I gave it to the teacher. And she said, oh, you finally arrived. She said, oh, it's beautiful, you know. And before I could tell her what had happened, she went to the head of the class with it, and she was telling everybody about, you know, the wonderful job I did in showing it to them and all. When she gave it back to me, I thanked her, and that was the end of my formal education, you know. But realistic art now is coming into its own again, you know. It had never really waned, but certain schools just didn't go for it. But it's I call it the people's art, because you can never hang a realistic painting upside down and don't know it, you know. So I see in a lot of the shows they have to write top on the canvas so you'll know how to hang it, but you don't have that problem when you do realistic work, you know.
The making of Hutchinson's sculptures is slow and deliberate. One bird can take months to complete. To protect his artistic integrity, he has turned down numerous offers for the commercial production of his work. Before he begins to sketch an idea, he spends hours and sometimes weeks researching his subjects.
I do not use mounts. I use mounts only for reference for color, but not for form and shape and attitudes and all that. I try to get that from the real bird, or the live bird, because if you want to, if you copy, I've seen too many artists make mistakes copying a mount, and it's a dead-looking bird. You have to have that vitality, that life, and that comes from freedom of lines and freedom of painting and knowing your subject intimately. You have to really study them, you know, so that you can portray them in a manner that looks real and gives you the life, because you're trying more than just a visual image. You're trying to give the essence of the spirit of the thing. When we try to use birds, we're not working with things like the higher animals that can give you facial expressions. You know, even a dog can growl and show his fangs and everything. But with a bird, all you have is beak and eyes, and of course bristling, he can riff and roll his feathers. So most of it is body language, you know, so you have to give him the attitudes, and this has to be out of, when you get ready to do a subject, you pick out what you want to do, then you have to pick out the moment that you would make it, you think it would be the prettiest, or give you the best view at that moment, you know. And you take that microsecond and you draw him in that attitude. And then I like to make thumbnail sketches, and then I go from that to developing my piece. Something to catch my interest. For instance, the pheasants. I was doing all our birds, the local birds and everything, you know, and I was looking at the magnificent color of these birds and everything, you know. So that interests me, and then the interest began to grow. And then I thought about, well, why not do a series of pheasants? You know, no one had done it, you know, that I know of, a series of them. So that was it. I was off to the races on that, you know. And it's just like that with anything. You begin to build an interest in something, and then when you focus on it, all of these things are so beautiful that once you start focusing on it, then you can find a reason to want to do it, because it's there all the time, you know.
Because his sculptures have received so much attention, there's another side of Hutchinson's art that many casual observers miss. He is also a painter. The same amount of meticulous detail that goes into his sculptures is apparent in his paintings of wildlife. Observers often instilled an intense concern for the environment as a whole.
Many of us walk by and the birds fly by, but we never really see it. You know, they're flying jewels, they're flying flowers, they're beauty. There's something that is part of us, but we're not very kind to them. You know, what we're doing to the environment is really bad. I can cry when I see what's happening. I remember as a boy when I used to go in the marshes and the swamps and everything. It was beautiful. I'm talking about maybe 50 years ago, you know, and it was beautiful. You know, a lot of the land I seen, I could just look at this acres of marsh that was green, and then they came with the pipeline canals, and then they began to cut the canals, and after a while I began to see this acres and acres of marsh dying, going away, you know, and that was sad. That's a sad thing to see.
Some of Hutchinson's sculptures have sold for upwards of $20,000, but money is not his main motivation for his art. It is his constant search for new challenges and an unending quest for perfection.
It isn't a glamorous job. You sit down there many hours doing this tedious work, but if you can keep this image in your mind as to what it's going to be, it's worth that time. Because I spent many hours alone just cutting on this wood and all. And people would say, why does he do it? But in the end, when it's done, I feel it was worth it when I look at the creation when it's complete. You always strive for excellence. You try to make the thing, you're striving for perfection, which we can't reach because we are imperfect, you know. But the quest for perfection will really make you push. It will really make you improve and grow. So long as we seek perfection, well, this is great, but we know we'll never reach it. So when the piece is done, I look at it and say, now where did I fall short? Because the image I have in my mind, like I say, the image is blurred from the mind to the hand. You know, we never quite can make what this beautiful image we have in our brains because we have almost perfect imagery in our brain. But by the time it gets to the finished stage, we can see that things are wrong. So I look for my faults, because through finding my faults, I can grow. And I hope to God I never get to the point where I make something and never see anything wrong with it, because then I'm finished.
Our next feature profiles Dr. Adrienne Hoard, an instructor in art education at LSU in Baton Rouge. Her art is as contemporary as Charles Hutchinson's is traditional. Adrienne Hoard has found a way to merge two careers. She is a successful artist and teacher. She began her academic studies in psychology and has found another winning combination, psychology and art.
When I went to college, when I first started out at Northwestern, I was a major in psychology because I was very interested in psychology, and that had been my father's field. So I thought, that's for me. But it was experimental psychology with rats and rabbits and electrodes, and I just couldn't put those electrodes in those little animals. So I found myself spending more and more time in my art labs. I had art classes in the afternoon, and eventually decided that that's what I really wanted to do.
Hoard has traveled all over the world studying art and demonstrating her own unique techniques. She is known in artistic circles for her abstract paintings.
The work is twofold. There are the free-form shaped canvases, like the one here behind me. Those are constructed. The images come to me. I think about the shape, the parameter of the painting, as well as the internal images. And they take anywhere from 3 weeks to 6 weeks to build and stretch and then begin working on. So I kind of have to hold that image very long in terms of the working on it. Whereas with the oil pastel watercolors, those are done on paper and are much more immediate. That's a kind of expression that I can begin working on and maybe be finished in 3 or 4 weeks.
One of Hoard's series of paintings utilizes shaped canvases that impart a sense of movement.
This particular shape is from 1976. I was doing a series of paintings for underwater creatures, and this is the magnificent octopus, and it's called Octomag 1. And I had the manta and the large sea lions and whales, all in that series between 76 and 78. So just the movement, these are like free form, free movement. I'm capturing a moment in time. At that second, this configuration appears, and 3 seconds later things have reorganized and changed and moved on, and so I'm trying to capture that second and hold it in color on canvas.
Hoard's use of color is a major part of the appeal of her paintings. She uses color to convey a particular mood to the viewer. Of course, the way each person perceives color is different, so her paintings can instill as many different moods as there are colors.
Color, as we know, is a phenomena. No two colors are really perceived the same unless they have the same surround or the same colors next to them or surrounding them. So I'm hoping that the color combinations are giving them a peaceful or happy feeling just because of the vibrations of the combinations that I've used. The titles, I think, have helped them. With the oil pastels, each of the small paintings has a vignette or a story that goes with it, and when I exhibit them I normally have the vignette there so that people in walking by can read the story about the piece and kind of get into the emotion of the piece. The work is all very personal and very emotional, and so they need some description or some adjectives or phrases to go along with it to kind of imply what I was thinking.
They form a triangle.
Well, I'm finding that people who have art training tend to use it. They rely on their art training to tell them what's going on in that painting. And people who do not have art training are giving more of a gut response, and their answers have more associations to real life meanings, as opposed to, say, an art-trained person might look at the painting and say geometric or abstract or color field. They'd use terminology that they've learned, and they depend on their training, where a non-trained person is going to come in and say, I feel this way about it. It looks like color blobs to me. I like the movement in it. Or it looks like a color horizon. They associate it with more real-life meanings, more so than the person with training.
In her role as teacher, Hoard strives to expose her students to educational theories and techniques, as well as an appreciation for the aesthetics of art. She is finding her dual roles as a teacher and an artist, each enhancing the other.
I am an artist. I think artists are born. They can be trained, but I think the spirit or the creative entity is born. It's something that's with you, and you won't be happy doing or being anything else, even if it's not as a painter or a sculptor, but in your own creative expression, you must have that freedom to express, or your personality is altered, changed, stifled. I'm a teacher because I love my students, and the interaction in the classroom is very important to me. Some of the best experiences I've had in Louisiana have been through my students, their responses in class, and many have become good friends. I've watched them graduate and change their lives, and it's been very rewarding for me.
Hoard finds that as she matures as an artist, her work is becoming more expressive and emotional.
My undergraduate degree was predominantly in portraiture, and that's what I did all the way through undergraduate school. I won a lot of contests and had a lot of commissions, and my parents were very happy about, this talent. But when I got to graduate school and there were no longer any classes or models, you had a studio and you did your own work, I really wanted to explore abstraction. And once I started, I didn't want to go back because of the freedom, the personal freedom, and the the freedom of expression. It's so personal and emotional and yet still abstract. I can kind of get away with saying all these things and not be too revealed.
Now we visit La Belle Gallery, the only gallery in New Orleans that features the work of Black artists exclusively. La Belle Gallery looks very much like many other galleries in the historic New Orleans French Quarter, but it is unique to all of the other galleries on colorful Royal Street because it is the first and only gallery that features the work of Black artists exclusively. The gallery is the brainchild of French immigrant Jean-Paul Pinel, who found the lack of an art gallery dedicated to Black artists in a city with a majority Black population a shameful oversight.
I was very surprised from the fact I've never seen any Black art galleries in New Orleans, and I discovered that almost people were ignoring maybe Black art, and I had requests for it. And I start to investigate on the national market to know where the Black artists were, and little by little I could discover artists. And I start to be in contact with them, and they send me some of their work, and I test their work in my gallery, and little by little I start to have a larger selection, and I was doing well. And from that, I had a dream to have a gallery which would be only specialized on Black art.
Bernadette Gills, manager of La Belle Gallery, came to work there shortly after becoming a customer. A New Orleans native, she also found the lack of a Black gallery disturbing.
For one thing, the population of Black people, considering there's a significant percentage of Blacks in New Orleans, there's definitely a need for some artistic expression by Black artists. And since we've opened this gallery, the reception has been very good to it.
I can say now, since I did that, a lot of people who are in the same business, which means art gallery, realize there is some Black art now, and try to do the same, which is good anyway for the Black community. I've seen also something which is interesting. All the artists around the square who were painting some subject, usual subject of St. Louis Cathedral or portrait, and since I opened this place, start to paint some Black subject as musicians or something like that, which is interesting to see.
We close today's program with our tribute to the late Frank Hayden of Baton Rouge, a world-renowned sculptor who was tragically killed earlier this year. Here, Al Laverne, a student and colleague of Hayden's, tells us about the man as a teacher, sculptor, and friend.
His environment, which we were part of, is really what made him produce those beautiful things. And it's a simplistic thing that came out of his work, but yet we could feel, and maybe that was something to remind us that we were all vulnerable in a way. And we are. And then he saw that and was able to say that. But he got that from looking at our faces and watching fellow man struggle every day. And I think if there's one theme that he'd always try to remember, remind us that, remember, we are just people, we are basic, and we need, let's not get carried away with the larger dreams. Remember that the kids must grow up, they must be cared for so that they can bloom. And that was his basic theme, I feel. One thing I remember about him, he paid me a compliment, a supreme compliment. And it was, I felt it was indirect, but he knew what he was doing. We were talking with a group of I think, a faculty meeting. And we were, I think, talking about another artist and possibly bringing another artist to work here at Southern. And when he looked at the artist and he got to meet the artist, I think he was saying, seemingly he's a great artist and everything, but he doesn't have the fire in his eyes like Laverne has. And that stayed with me. He just felt he could see fire in my eyes, and, you know, and I just cherished that.
Well, that's it for today's program. Be sure to join us next week for another edition of Folks. Bye-bye.
Funding for the production of Folks is made possible in part by a grant from Union National Life Insurance, serving Louisiana and the South since 1926, a family-managed corporation providing whole life insurance.